Maximo, thank you. I don't know what the hell is actually going on. Like, genuinely have no idea what's going on. This bloody internet. My internet just went down. That's the big issue. TMB, yes, my stream crashed again. My internet crashed, actually. It wasn't the stream. It was the whole internet that just went down. Mongoku, I have no frame of reference for what you guys were just discussing. I don't even know if the stream is still going. Is the YouTube stream going? Is it not going? What's happening? Because this is what I'm seeing on my side. I'm seeing some viewers, but anywhere again, the YouTube stream died. Michael, yes, I know, I'm aware. The issue is, it's my internet that keeps dying. It's my internet that keeps going down, and I'm not sure why. If Cole, how you doing, bro? Welcome back to you, sir. I don't know what's going on, boys. I have no idea. The internet seems to be doing internet things at the moment. It seems like it's incredibly unstable, and yet it was fine 3 hours ago. You know, I say 3 hours ago because 3 hours ago I was constantly busy searching stuff on the internet and not one problem whatsoever. Now suddenly it's just acting up. It's like dropping the stream. I don't know. I guess welcome to South Africa. It is what it is. Blame it on the feminists today. It's their turn to share the blame. No, I don't know. We've had a good run. It's been a while since we've had internet trouble, so maybe now it's just my turn. You know, maybe life's been going too good for too long. I needed a bit of a, come down moment. So we are where we are. Digit, thank you so much for the 4 bits, sir. Really appreciate you. Thank you. The last I did was asking a hypothetical about an already married couple converting to Christianity. What are the view on the non-Christian marriage? Only curious. Michael, this I don't really know, to be very honest with you. I don't really know. I mean, what we do know is no, actually that wouldn't apply here. I don't know. I have no idea. I'll find out for you. I'll talk to my friends and my pastor. I'll find out for you. So it sounds like a prime opportunity for another party to me. I mean, they're expensive. Weddings are not cheap. So I don't think anyone would just luckily. I don't think I've ever heard of non-Christians converting and then having to marry again. But then again, they might get, because fundamentally all they need to do is get married by the pastor. So they may do it completely just to do it, right? Just to confirm it. I think it would come down to every single church doing their own thing there. Adrenaline Gaming, how you doing, brother? I think every church would do it differently. That's at least my opinion. I mean, I could ask my pastor now. He's on sabbatical though, so I'm not sure if he would respond immediately, but it's an interesting thing. I want to ask him. Hold the phone, boys. Hold the phone. Peter. I've tried not to bother him too much, so he's now way down on my WhatsApp. Here we go. Sorry, guys. I'm just asking him. Let's just make sure. As 'n man en 'n vrou getroud is voor hulle Christen word en hulle was moslems, moet hulle weer in die kerk trou. So I basically just asked him if a man and a woman get married before they were Christian but say they were Muslims, should they marry again? All right. So I'm gonna ask him that, and we'll see. He'll come back to me when he sees this. I think he's spending time with his family at the moment, so I don't expect him to reply anytime soon. I do know that some marry again voluntarily. This was pure curiosity. Dude, you got me curious now, which is why I'm texting my pastor during his sabbatical, being like, bro, what's this? Like, what's the story here? What are we supposed to be doing here? Titanborn, how you doing, brother? Tell him a bunch of potential converts are asking. I don't think I'm converting anyone with this necessarily, but hey, I'll take any conversion I can. Doing good, my day off. Play SOD Phase 8, loving it. Nice, Titanborn. Very nice. I think confirmation would be the answer. Oh, Mongoku, holy crap. Wait, what? So they have to first verify that you two aren't related. Oh, man, okay. That makes sense, actually. I'd say you've been pivotal in my halfway conversion. Caliph, if that is true, I thank God for that, because I cannot convert you. I have no power. But if people get moved by the conversations we're having, I praise God for that all day long. How does your pastor feel about you having your own small international online gathering? Mongoku, I don't know how he feels about it. I know how I feel about it. Stressed and very worried. All I pray for is that when I speak, I'm guided by the Holy Spirit, because I don't think I I don't think I know enough to really be able to speak. But I also don't mind discussing stuff. That's why I will always tell you this is just my opinion. This is how I interpret it, because I don't think I know anywhere near enough to be a community manager or anywhere near, right, a religious informant of any kind. So it does stress me out, because the last thing I want, and I would rather be put to death than be a source of false information. Like, I don't ever want to say something on this stream that allows for a fellow believer to be misled or to believe something that is false in any way, shape, or form. So then I would rather just be killed. So yeah, I'm a little worried about it. I don't know how he feels about it. They know I talk about religion on Twitch, and I'm happy to discuss my faith, so they do know that. But I think if he were honest with me, he'd probably say, you need to return to, you're now in the phase of learning. You're not yet anywhere near the place where you're supposed to be teaching. Because remember, I only came to faith not even really truthfully a year ago, right? So just over a year that I've been a Christian. I should not be teaching anyone, which is why I love discussing these things and I love talking about God. But I will always preface it as saying this is just my interpretation or my opinion on what I'm reading. I'll be very careful to never say that, oh, this is 100% the truth. Because hell no. I don't know if that's true. You're pulling me back to faith. I can say that, and I am sorry for any disruptions I may have caused you. Kimmy, you didn't cause anything. Like, not at all. Please, never apologize for anything. Like, we've been friends for way too long for you to apologize for stuff like that. But I do thank God for that too. For the fact that through me, he is pulling you back to faith. Because it is a wonderful thing. Bleach for fun, how you doing? Stuck behind sloth, though biased in favor of Christianity. Haven't gone on the reaching deep dive you did that proved Christianity to you. Caleb, that is your choice. And you'll be moved when you're ready. One thing you have to remember is it is not you that come to faith. God moves you to faith when you're ready. You cannot go to God because you don't. Your flesh doesn't want God. In fact, your flesh wants anything but God. So if it wasn't for God pulling you towards faith, you would never become faithful. I would say the first sign is people that are curious, that are asking the right questions. That's a good sign. So yeah, take your time, man. I have tremendous love for atheists in my heart. I used to be one of you. And yeah, I don't really judge people. You know, everyone's journey is their own. I think discussions like this are arguably just as important as the conversations people have with their pastors. Oh yeah, as long as you guys understand these conversations, and I think you guys do. I'm not trying to make myself seem more important than what I am. I think most of you understand this is just a conversation about religion among contemporaries, among peers. This is not a conversation where I'm the teacher and I'm trying to teach people anything. Because I still need a teacher. And that's why I'm super open to having debates and discussions and, having people disagree with me because I have no idea, right? If what I'm believing is the truth, I simply believe that it is the truth. I don't mean to say I don't believe that I have a lot of proof that God is real. What I mean is my specific interpretations of the Bible, I cannot sell to you as absolutely true because I have not done enough research yet to be able to back that up with fact. David, how you doing, bro? John Michael Gaudier, sci-fi author and Cambridge University, are reading data from Planet K2 18b. It is considered an ocean world. Methane, O2, equals 20 times of Earth, lit by a red dwarf. David, wait, what does that mean, though? What does that mean? Blinkart, how you doing? I've been a Christian majority of my life. However, I do the respectful thing of not preaching to anyone. My life has been difficult and I'm lucky to be alive. Somehow I managed to survive over the years. And I mean, not somehow. God kept you, which is great. I oftentimes, I go between two schools of thought on this. On the one hand, I hate that it took me 40 years to find Christ. I hate it. Because I went dark side, man. Looking back at my life, it's not been a good one. Looking back at my life, I'm definitely one of the people who do not deserve grace or salvation. The fact that I have it sometimes is a bit surreal to me. And speaks to the incredible mercy and grace of God, that he looked at a sinner like me and said, I'll send my son to die for your sins as well. Because I was at war with Christ, right? Unlike most people who just sort of lived their lives going, I actively made fun of God. I actively made fun of Christ. I actively made fun of Christians. I would go out of my way to try and ridicule Christian thought, Christian belief. I studied the Bible not to believe in it, but to show Christians how stupid they are. And so it's a great mark of shame for me that it took me this long to find Christ. So I sometimes envy people like you that came to Christ at the age of 16 or 17 and have spent all of their would-be dark years already saved, so they didn't have to go quite through the same stuff that I went through. They don't quite have to live with the regrets that I have to live with. But then also at the same time, there's also a part of me, there's a part of me that is grateful for it. Because I don't view atheists the way that normal Christians do. Right? I don't think about Christianity the way that normal Christians do. And I don't mean by that I'm special or anything. When you speak to most Christians and you have a conversation with them, they'll legitimately just be like, well, this is what the Bible says, so this is what you have to believe. As an atheist, former, I hated that argument. And here's why. Your book that I do not believe in is not evidence of what you say. You believing in the book makes no difference to me. So if all you're doing is giving me scriptures from your book, that's not convincing. So unless you can convince me that what your book says is true, independent of the book, we have a problem. Right? So the way I think about faith, and we've had these discussions before, I don't just take what the Bible says as the only truth, although it is the only truth. But I I try to understand, how does that translate to the real world? So if God says marriage is between a man and a woman, if that is optimally true, then I would need to see that play itself out in the world, right? So the world needs to correspond with what the book says. Because if the book says something and I cannot find a corresponding sense of fact or data in the real world that backs it up, we have a problem. Most Christians won't even entertain that sense of thought, because remember, they already accept that the word is true. And so you not believing it is a you problem, not a their problem. So for as ashamed as my journey makes me, I'm also grateful that I went through it, because it allows me to sit here and have conversations with atheists. And I feel like I might be better equipped to have those conversations. Not that I'm smart enough to have them, but at least I'm equipped enough that I can dive into those conversations, right? In a way that isn't just, well, because the Bible says so, Custom, how you doing, sir? Don't you think God created two genders with a reason? Well, of course, right? Of course, God created two genders with a specific reason. But if someone asks you, right, why can't a trans person be whoever they think they are? If they're not Christian, your answer, because the Bible says so, means nothing. Because if I'm not a Christian, your book is of no value to me. Your book is useless to me, because you're saying, oh, this book that I have says that it's true. And as an atheist, I used to look at that and go, so what? Your book means nothing. Okay, your book to me is useless. You need to give me actual evidence from the world that proves this. I need to be able to see how the book and the reality complement one another, right? And then we can go look at suicide rates. We can go look at the idea as it used to be sold that if we accept trans people, they'll stop committing suicide and they'll finally be happy. And we can look at the data and say, well, clearly that isn't true, right? We can go look at the success rate between gay couples getting married and the success rate between straight couples getting married. We can look at statistics around pious marriage versus sort of worldly marriage, right? And we can put all of these things together, and what we find is, by absolute country miles, the most successful marriages on the planet are marriages where the man and the woman, so it is a marriage between a man and a woman, they did not live together before they got married. They did not engage in sex before they got married. And they are Christian. Right? Or at least religious. These are the most successful marriages. And we're not just talking about marriages not leading to divorce. We're talking about marriage in terms of being happy together.
I will do anything.
Both feeling good, all the rest of it, right? So there's a bunch that goes into that, I think. For a Facebook group discussing the top bunker brokers on Twitch. I was told you are... Wait. Let me know. Is it high-end brokers? Like, what the hell? Jeff, I don't know what you're talking about, but okay. Christians have a very high resilience. Your car can be a helicopter today. True. So if the Bible is talking about a psychologically point, then we go look at the claims in psychological science. Kind of pretty much, right? So if the Bible tells us that this thing is good, does that correlate to the natural world, right? Or am I read your previous two. Dos Matrix, how you doing, sir? I have a desire to do something very autistic. I want to read the Bible front and back with all the notes and then go online research and shit out of every point from a multidisciplinary disciplinary standpoint. Go for it, bro. Absolutely go for it. Maybe God allowed you to live a life like that so you could be more effective at pulling more people out of that fire. That's how I look at it for myself. The strongest iron is forged in fire, brother. Oh yeah, I think God allows every single one of his children to live the life that would be best suited to his glory. And if that requires you to walk through the absolute darkest parts of humanity, then that's what you're required to do, Yeah, man, a few years ago, I had a heart attack and was brought back in an ambulance at the front of my house. I then passed again in the flying doctors on the way to hospital. Something greater exists. Thus, Matrix, I am grateful that you exist, sir, and that you're still around. Really grateful for that. How you doing, good sir? Oceans hold many secrets, even our own. Creatures believed to be extinct since millions of years are occasionally discovered still alive. I have a memory about a crab being found alive. I think I miss the preamble to that conversation, Michael. Don't question his timing. The hard digging you did built a strong foundation for you, and telling us is relatable. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate. See, one of the hardest things, I think, as humans is to know that everything that happens on this planet is to the glory of God. That's very difficult because you think about your life. You think about the things that you go through. Maybe you're struggling with finances. Maybe you're struggling with your wife or your kids or your health or whatever the case may be. And to then realize that everything you're going through is to his glory and is ultimately good because he is ultimately good. That's tough. Like, that's seriously tough. There's been times where I look at my channel, for example, and I look at the growth on the channel, or I look at the money that I'm making, and I'm like, this is going to be a tough month. This is going to be a hard time. Why am I going through this? And then you have to remind yourself, hold up, you don't know the future, right? You only know what is literally right in front of you. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, the day after, or next week. All you know is what's happening right now. And because you don't know what's happening tomorrow or the day after or next week, you have to accept that whatever is happening currently is good. Even if it doesn't look like it's good, it is good. And you have to have faith that in the end, it'll work out the way that it does, Oh, Michael. Okay, I get where we are now. To a lot of the ills of life, a bridge too far for me. Life can be really bad. TMB, so remember, life can be really bad from your point of view. But I'll give you this sort of story. It's not an analogy or anything, it's just a story. Imagine quickly this, okay? Imagine there's a guy, we'll call this guy Chris. Chris wakes up. Chris is 38 years old. Chris leaves the house, gets into his car, and Chris is following all the rules, right? So as Chris is driving, he gets to the red light. He stops at the red light. The light turns green and Chris decides to go past. As Chris is going, Susan, a mother of 4, is distracted by her children. She hits Chris's car at 120 kilometers per hour or 70 miles per hour or so. And in the collision, Chris dies and all 4 of her children die as well. Now, you would look at this and you would think, how can anything there be good? How can anything there ever be good? This is a terrible circumstance. This is beyond evil and bad and horrible. 4 children, the oldest of which was 12, just died, right? This woman is going to live for the rest of her life with the knowledge that not only did she kill a man, but she also killed her 4 children. How can anything here be good? And that's what you see as you're standing on the side of the road watching this accident happen. And you think, God, why would you allow something this evil to happen? And so you go on with your life, walking away thinking, God, if there is a God, he cannot be good, because why would he allow something this evil to happen? Unbeknownst to you, a year later, that woman gives her heart to Christ. The pain and the suffering made it impossible for her to continue as a non-believer. She turned to Christ. Through her husband becomes a Christian. They have another child, only this time they're raising that child in the name of God and the Father. You don't know any of that. A year later, you're off doing your atheist thing because God, if there is a God and that God is good, I don't want to believe in that guy because he allowed 4 children to die right in front of me. But you don't know that because you don't know what happened afterwards. This is why when I tell you, everything that happens to the glory of God. This is why I tell you it's so difficult as people for us to know that, right? Because we don't know everything. We don't see everything. I could leave my house this evening after the stream and I could be Chris. And that lady kills me. And maybe that was the only reason I was placed on this planet. God allowed me to be born, live the life that I did, in order to be killed by Susan at the robot, so that Susan and her husband could come to faith. Now, I could sit there and I could say, how dare he? But wouldn't that be a bit silly? He made you. He can do whatever he wants with you. Right? It's hard. I fully acknowledge it. As a human, that's a very difficult thing to get over. Because bad stuff happens and you think, man, this isn't fun. But you have to always remember, you are limited in what you can see. We're all limited in what we can see. And this makes our opinion on it very, very biased and subjective. Yeah. By the way, who did I miss? Yulia, how you doing? And also, I missed someone else. Moldy, so here's where your mistake happens. You say God killed the 4 children. When did I say that it was God that killed the 4 children? When did I say that? Did Susan not drive her own car? Did Chris not drive his own car? Could Chris not have looked both ways? Could Susan not have focused on the road rather than being distracted by her children? Could Susan not have strapped her children into the vehicle? At no point here did I say that God took hold of the car and literally rammed it into Chris's car. The world was created with freedom in mind. You make decisions based on that freedom that you were given to make said decisions. God simply plans around the consequences of your decisions. He doesn't interfere, because that would take away your freedom to choose. Right? If God can simply override your choices, then you're not really free, are you? So, Susan killed Chris. Susan did kill her 4 children. But out of that, God allowed something good to happen. In the depths of that misery, God allowed something good to happen. Because remember, you cannot have good unless you also have evil. Because how would you know what good is? If only good things happen to you, then you wouldn't call it good, it would just be things. Good is only good because it isn't bad. And in a world where freedom is important, and clearly it is, right? Because God wouldn't have made free will if he didn't think that it was important. Sadly, that also opens the door for bad stuff to happen. Because if God wanted no bad stuff to happen ever, he could have just made us automatons, right? Automatons. Like if he really didn't want anything bad to ever happen and he wanted to control everything, he would have just made us little robots. But that would not have meant that we actually follow him, right? It would have meant that we were just serving him. You don't have any other way to do it, so you may as well just do this. So it wouldn't be true. It wouldn't be real. You'd just be... It's sort of like World of Warcraft, right? Isn't living in service to its creators. World of Warcraft can only act the way that World of Warcraft was coded to act. There is nothing else to it. It just does what it was programmed to do. God clearly didn't want us to be that. He wanted us to have our own faculty and our own, what's the English word? Agency. He wanted us to have agency. With agency comes good and bad. That's just facts, right? The part that I was talking about, for those who came in early, is even the bad stuff that God allows to happen because it has to happen, right? Otherwise, God has to start micromanaging, and that removes the free will part of it. But even the bad stuff happens to the glory of God, because he makes sure that out of the worst possible moments comes the best possible outcome to his glory. It was horrible and 10% was good, even though I'm a good person. Suffering still happens. Adrenaline gaming, I hate to be pedantic, but are you a good person? Moldy, in what way are the two mutually exclusive? You say if you believe in God, you cannot believe in free will. The two are mutually exclusive. How so? Explain, please. So you believe that you're a good person. Compared to whom? See, vengeance, if God really didn't want it, you wouldn't be able to. Not always a good person, try to be, but definitely not. This is a question to everyone in chat that might think that they're at least a decent person. Compared to whom? you'll notice, and I do it myself, so that's why I'm asking the question. You'll notice that you always think you're a good person compared to the worst people the world has to offer. You compare yourself to other people and go, well, at least I'm not that bad. But compare yourself to God. Compare yourself to someone that has no sin. In fact, someone that is so holy that sin physically cannot exist in his presence. And then ask yourself, are you good? Someone knows all that will happen. That means your actions are already known, like prophecy. If the results of everything are already written, then you aren't actually taking your own actions. You're taking the actions that an architect created to happen. But Moldy, aren't you being a bit fallacious there? I have stairs about 5, maybe 6 yards away from where I sit right now. There's stairs going down to the first floor. At the bottom of the stairs, there's a step that is slightly higher than normal steps, right? Just beyond the step, there's a table. Now, let's say, for some reason, all right, I'm standing at the bottom of the stairs, and someone was working in the house, and they forgot a piece of wood in between the step and the table. Now, I look, and I go, Moldy is going to walk down these stairs. On the last step, he's going to take a bit of a wobble because he doesn't know that it's a bit higher than the others. He's going to trip over the piece of wood and slam into the table. If you do what I literally just said you're going to do, did I make you do it or did you do it yourself? Me knowing that this is exactly what you're going to do is not me doing it to you. I simply know that that is exactly what you're going to do. And how do I know that that is exactly what you're going to do? Because I know you. I know every decision you make before you make it. Doesn't mean I made you make the decision. I just know that you will not make that decision any other way because that is how you were brought up. That is how your parents taught you. That is how your first teacher impacted you and affected you. No, but now we're back to the first part. You set up the scenario and allowed it to happen. Hold up. If you're saying that I'm now the one setting up the scenario, so you're saying you're completely innocent in all of this. You didn't decide to walk down the stairs. You didn't decide to look at the stairs and realize that one is a bit higher than the other. You didn't decide to look and see that there's a piece of wood standing in your way. And you didn't decide to see that there is a table. None of this is your fault. Instead, I am the one who did all of these things to you, even though I just told you. The stairs are there. They were built by a builder. The piece of wood that lies there, that was left there by the guy that did carpentry and forgot to remove the piece of wood. The table is there because that's where the people of the house put the table. You slamming into it was not set up by me. It's simply me reading the situation and knowing what you're going to do because I know you. I know how you think and I know how you act. Now, what it seems like you want to do is you want to say that God is the personal architect of every single situation that happens, regardless of anything. In other words, God micromanages every single element of this universe, fine-tuning it to ensure that everything happens exactly in the right way that he wants it to happen. The problem with that is you're now creating a bunch of fallacies that you cannot back up with anything other than that's what I think. Because the Bible never tells us that God does any of that in any of those ways. In fact, the Bible does not describe God as that sort of God. Not in any way, shape, or form. In fact, throughout most of the Old Testament, God doesn't interfere with the Jews at all. People make the mistake of reading the Bible as if everything happened day after the other. On Wednesday, they were sent to the Egyptians as slaves. On Thursday, they escaped and went back to Judah. But that's not true. There are hundreds of years in between the moments that you read of in the Bible that God did not interfere with the Israelites one way or the other, where they were able to live their lives literally how they saw fit. God doesn't micromanage anything. Now, you could say, well, I don't believe in your Bible. Well, then what conversation are we having? Because you're asking me to defend my God against your made-up thing. You just invented this God that you decide to blame for everything. If I happen to believe in him, but I don't believe in your God. He's not the one that you just invented, because you can't give me scripture that shows me that the God you invented is the real God. It says he's all-knowing and omniscient. Yeah, all-knowing, omniscient is what I told you. He's everywhere, all at once, and he knows everything you're going to do before you do it. That still does not mean that he made you do it. That just means that he allowed it to happen. He didn't interfere with it. But that none of what you just said, which means you can logically follow it to that conclusion. No. Don't use the word logic in what you just did. What you did was a logical leap. You leapt from someone knowing everything and being everywhere to someone micromanaging everything everywhere. Those are not logical conclusions. There's a number of steps in between what you just said, God is all-knowing and omniscient, which I agree with, to God knowingly directing every single scenario of every single person's life. There's giant steps missing in that conclusion. Which, maybe you're right, but you're going to have to fill in those steps, no? Like, you're going to have to provide all of the steps that reaches to your conclusion. If you set up the universe to know every action that happens after you set up the universe, you know every step everyone is going to take, you could have set it up differently and different things would have happened. Okay, Moldy, now we're talking my language. So, okay, I'm going to assume, and you have to do this too because we are talking about my God here, I'm going to assume that God is good and only good and never does anything evil. So we're going to use your scenario here. Okay, I'm going to actually make this even easier. And I'm going to explain it using one of my favorite tools. The tool is called Paint. I like Paint because it makes it easy. And I'm going to do a little bit of a different thing here for people. Let's gamify the creation story. So we're going to gamify it a little. Nothing I'm about to say is how I think it actually happened. I don't think, I am trying to humanize how this process would have played out. Since God is not human, this process would have happened instantaneously with no real thought processes, because God would just know what the right answer is. But in order to make it make sense, we have to kind of gamify it. So you're God. You exist before the beginning of time with Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. And the Bible says you had so much love between the three of you that you wanted to create life. You wanted to breathe life into the universe. But you want to make you want to make the universe specific, right? So you're God, and you want to make absolutely sure that the universe exists within specific parameters. One of these parameters is you want free will to exist within the universe. In other words, you want, when your creation chooses to love you, it has to be absolutely their choice. So in other words, it cannot be forced. It cannot be something that they have no choice over. They have to absolutely be able to make the choice themselves, because otherwise it wouldn't be real. And so you set up this sort of, let's call it, basic rules before you start programming. So think about someone programming a world. So God programs the world and he says, right, so the first thing I need is free will, right? I want the universe to have free will. Then I want as many people as possible to be saved. Now, because I've created free will, because people have free will, 100% of people can never be saved. That's impossible. The only way I can get 100% of all people to be saved would be to remove free will. But since free will is important to me because I want the decision to be real, 100% will likely never actually happen, right? Because for 100% to happen, it would mean that you could have no contradictions whatsoever to exist. So either you have to make it that even the psychopathic Hitler can be saved, right? And, the nun can be saved, or you have to have certain rules. And since God is moral, just, and absolutely rational, and a God of laws and rules, he's obviously not going to have a willy-nilly everyone gets saved, right? He has specific requirements for people to be his followers, to be his children. And you have to live according to his requirements in order to be saved. So now God says, okay, let's apply all of this and let's run a simulation. So let's design a universe, right, with just the right amount of free will so that people are free to make their own decisions. And let's play out every possible iteration of these universes, right? So we end up simulating 10 billion universes, right? So there's like billions of these universes everywhere, right? Just overlapping everywhere, running all over the place. And each of them has, like, imagine the movie Butterfly Effect, right? Each of them, when you come, so this morning I woke up, I went to the bathroom, I peed, and then I brushed my teeth, and then I showered, and then I grabbed a cup of coffee. But in another universe, I woke up, I first showered, and I peed in the shower, and then I grabbed a cup of tea. In another universe, I woke up and I tortured the person that I have in my basement, right? So it's like all of these different universes is different butterfly effects that is playing itself out all over the place. Because remember, free will encapsulates all of this. There has to be free will. People have to freely choose, which means every single one of these are now playing out. From how my father was, how my mother was, how they were raised, how their father or mother was raised, how I was raised. Everything changes every single time in order to get to this free sort of world. Now, the end of the simulation happens, and God looks at the results, and God sees. In this universe, 1% of people were saved. In this universe, 10% of people were saved. In this universe, 0% of people were saved. They all basically just went bonkers and absolutely evil. In this universe, 25% of people were saved. In this one, 7%. In this one, 8%. Or whatever the hell that number is. In this one, we have 12.5% of people saved, right? So all over every single one of these leads to a specific amount of people being saved. And here's this one little universe. Where 26.7% of people is saved. This is the highest number out of every possible iteration. Every single possible outcome of you walking down the steps, playing itself out. This universe gives God 26.7% of humanity ends up going to heaven, choosing Christ, and spending eternity with God. And so God says, this is the one I'll go with. They can't. Free will makes it so that 100% of people cannot be saved. It's impossible. But I'll choose the universe where the most amount of people can be saved. So that, in the end, those who chose me. They weren't forced. I didn't remove their choice. I gave them absolute choice. And these are the decisions they made. That's what omniscience and all-knowing is. And that's how the choice was made. Obviously humanized and gamified, because all of this would have been instantly for God. But in order for us to sort of grasp it, we have to gamify it a little. Answer me this. We're not saved because we're born in sin, right? What caused sin? Well, sin had to exist. We kind of know, at least from the Bible, we know that sin exists almost from the beginning, right? Now, the understanding of sin is what's important. Sin is the opposite of God's character. So, sin or evil is simply the absence of God. When you're not acting in the character of God, you're sinful. This is what sinful behavior is. The Bible gives us a very good explanation of that. But now, this is where we get to remember our universe here, okay? So if you're God, you have free will. Free will is important to you. What does free will require? I'll get to that, Moldy. What does free will require? It needs options. If I told you you're absolutely free to choose whatever you want, as long as you choose this red circle, are you free to choose whatever you want? What choice did you really have? Right? You clearly didn't have anything here. You had one choice, and that was the red circle, so not much of a choice. The only way for me to give you choice is to create a second circle. Right? Green one. So now you are free to choose. Whichever one you want, make a choice. In order for us to choose God, we also have to be able to choose against God. Otherwise, there is no choice. We're told in the Bible, in the beginning, Adam and Eve is in the Garden of Eden. They're with God. They're in his presence. And then they eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So now they have the knowledge of good and evil. So prior to the garden, they didn't have knowledge of evil. The thing is, Genesis doesn't tell us whether or not they did evil or whether or not they would have sinned, but simply that they had no knowledge of it. They didn't know what sin was. So most likely they didn't crave sin. But then they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and suddenly they became very aware of evil, right? And what is evil and what isn't evil, right? Game Review, how you doing, brother? So this is where a lot of, I think, sometimes Christians get it completely wrong, because what they miss is that Adam and Eve wasn't the first people to fall to sin. The snake fell to sin long before Adam and Eve fell to sin. Right? Now, if we listen to the curse that Adam and Eve carries, it is this knowledge of good and evil that causes us to sin. It creates a barrier between us and God. Because our flesh, the thing that we have, our bodies, crave the thing of the world. And since God needed an opponent because you need choice, right? God gave, and again, just going to the Bible here, because we are talking about my God, so I'm going to use my book. Satan takes Jesus up on the highest mountain, and he says to Jesus, see this, see all of these kingdoms as far as the eye can see. I will give you all of these kingdoms if you but bow down and worship me. Why can Satan say this to Jesus? Because God gave the kingdoms of the world to him. Satan is the ruler of earth. So if you're asking what caused us to sin, in a way, Satan. What caused Satan to sin? He was allowed to think freely, and he decided to be arrogant and jealous. He wanted more. He wanted more power. At least that's what we sort of theorize. We don't really know, because the Bible isn't very clear on why Satan rebelled or why Satan didn't want to follow God. We just know that he didn't, right? I'll be honest with you. I don't think that this is an answer that you find satisfactory. I wouldn't either. Back when I was an atheist, this answer would not be satisfactory. But it also happens to be a very difficult question you just asked me, because you're asking me to speak about something that only the Creator would know. Only God knows why we sin or how we even became sinners in the first place. I wasn't there, and I'm definitely not smart enough to know. So all I can tell you is we do sin. We do. Every single thing we do is sin. We live for sin. The only problem is most people don't think they live for sin, because most people don't even know what sin is. David Moldy, you have free will insofar as you freely make decisions for yourself. Now, if the kind of free will you're after is a free will absolutely not influenced by anything, you're the wrong species. Right? But now we're also getting into a sort of philosophical conversation about the existence of free will in the first place, which is a fine conversation to have, but you'll note that it is bickering over nonsense. Because fundamentally, even though your past, your experiences, your upbringing, even though all of these things will influence your free choice and make it not necessarily as free, you still are free to make that decision, and you're free to make another decision. You get people all the time that choose things that go against what you would think they would choose for themselves, right? Pirate, how you doing, bro? Patches, it's fine that you say that. I just showed you how. I notice, however, that none of you ever really come up with an explanation for it. You just go, no, yeah, you're absolutely wrong. A God, and also notice how you go, a God that is in control of everything. Wow, that's a bit sneaky, right? You just snuck that one in there. I can absolutely know the outcome of literally every single thing that's going to happen. And I can be in control of the system without influencing your ability to make a choice. I'm in control insofar as I'm preserving the system. I'm ensuring that the system maintains stability. I'm ensuring that the system doesn't just crash. But I'm not influencing your decision. This should be like saying, well, actually, me playing World of Warcraft and all the decisions I make in World of Warcraft is the result of Ian as he cost us. Why? Ian is simply preserving the system. Ian created a bunch of different choices for you to take in World of Warcraft, but he's absolutely not the one forcing you to raid or forcing you to PvP or forcing you. Like, that's you choosing to do the things. He's just preserving the system. Doesn't mean he's the one that sets up the failure of your raid. Oh, this is Ian's fault 100%. You're the one that chose to go to raid with 10 tanks. Right? That was not Ian's choice. That was your choice. So fundamentally, I feel like you're making a huge jump, right? From this is an omnipotent, omniscient, and all-knowing God that knows what you're going to do even before you do it, to somehow turning it into, he makes me do it. How is that even for a second compatible? How is that your logical conclusion? Your logic is flawed if that is your logical conclusion. Moldy, again, you're saying that God created or God controlled the situation. And in a way, you're correct. But let's look at Job. So Satan comes to God and says, I can turn Job against you. Now, you're right. God knows for a fact that Job will not turn against him. Job truly loves him. But God says to Satan, okay, it's fine. You can test him, but cannot kill him. Cannot take his life. You can do whatever you want to him. Cannot take his life. So yes, God is absolutely in control. And God has absolutely set the limits on what Satan is or is not allowed to do. But fundamentally, it was not God that pushed Satan to test Job. It was not God that brought those things onto Job. It was not God that determined how Job should react to a lot of these things. God allowed it to happen, and Job could have made a different decision. Just because God knew what decision Job was going to make does not mean that God made Job make that decision. That would again be an example of you making an extreme logical leap with no evidence whatsoever to back it up, other than I said so. Patches, in what way? Give me the scripture where Jesus says, you're not free to make your own decisions. You're the one saying that Jesus, the apostles in the scriptures, do not teach free will at all. So give me without me, you can do nothing. In context to what was Jesus saying that? Good sir. Read the full passage, please. Don't just choose. We spoke about this earlier. Choosing the small, tiny little passage that proves your point. Let's read it in context. Jesus was talking about miracles, healing the sick, coming to faith, trusting in God, following God's will, being saved. Jesus says, without me, you cannot do anything. Jesus isn't talking about the guy that wants to sleep with the prostitute. Jesus is talking in specific terms about healing, about raising people from the dead, about going to heaven. Right? You cannot go to God except through me. No one comes to the Father except for me. That's what Jesus says. You still have to make the choice to go to Christ. You have to choose to follow Christ, and then through Christ, you can go to heaven. That's not the same. Again, you're jumping to a conclusion. You're reading a single passage out of context, I may add, and then arriving at a bunch of conclusions as a result of the single passage without actually reading the full passage in context and then saying, well, this is clearly what I think. No ignorance by saying that, but I want to see you understand what he's explaining. XKV, I think, so here's the thing. There was a time during my atheism where nothing anyone said to me or anything anyone showed me would have saved me. I would not have changed my mind on anything. Ever. Like, I was so filled with a need that God doesn't exist. I needed God not to exist. I desperately didn't want God to exist. That nothing anyone said to me would have changed my mind any other way, because I desperately didn't want God to exist. It wasn't until years later that this would change for me, to where I would be in a point where, and I wasn't necessarily even susceptible to believing in God, right? I wasn't necessarily open to believing in God, but I wasn't as militantly atheist as I once was. I had sort of moved away from militant atheism and moved more towards open-minded. I was sort of like, yeah, maybe there could be a God. I don't know. I don't really care, right? And this was the moment that God could finally start working in my heart and change me from within. So when I talk to people, I'm not interested in them saying, "Oh man, you're so absolutely correct. I can't believe you just said that." I hope that a seed is planted. That's my prayer, is that a seed is planted, and then slowly but surely that seed will grow. Slowly but surely that seed will turn into something real. And of course, it's not me planting the seed, it's God, it's the Holy Spirit. I'm just the messenger. And if God decides to speak through me, then he speaks through me, right? If I'm talking out of my bumhole here, then, nothing will happen, and I may be doing more harm to the faith than good, which, if that is the case, I beg for forgiveness, right? But yeah, fundamentally, I'm not looking to change. I can't bring anyone in this chat to faith. I don't have that power. I can only share my story and share my view on things and hope that moves people, at least to some extent. To be honest too, I'm typically not militantly atheist. I just came into your stream to watch WoW stuff because I haven't viewed you much recently. But I do believe that Christianity exists for those that need it. But I think it limits us as well, which is why I will sometimes argue against it. So Moldy, I don't play WoW anymore, so you perhaps providentially came into the stream looking for something that you were not going to find here in the first place. But in saying that, I don't necessarily agree that Christianity limits us in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I think we need Christianity. You can take the person out of religion, but you cannot take religion out of the person. Fundamentally, all I have ever seen from people who proclaim not to be religious is that they are simply religious in different ways. I am yet to meet a single person that isn't religious. That includes atheists. Because you do get atheists, and in fact, a lot of them, who are religiously atheist. They have their pastors, either Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens. They have their deacons, they have their elders, they have their teachers, their messiahs. They have their arguments. Human beings need religion. There is no such thing as a human being that isn't religious. You can either follow the true God, or you can follow a made-up one. If you look on the left, for example, you look specifically at the woke and I'm assuming this is where you're going to get angry. I don't know, but you might be progressive. Atheists tend to be a bit more progressive, not necessarily as conservative, but you look, for example, at a lot of the progressive movement. You look at how militantly and religiously they defend the tenets of their progressivism, and you realize that it's just a faith, right? It's just a faith for them. You look at the woke liberals that basically emulate Christianity without grace. The only difference between their religion and Christianity is that there is no grace. But there are sins, there are mortal sins, there are moral sins, there are condemnation for sin. It's like, it is a religion. They just don't have grace. There's no forgiveness for your sins. If you sin, you have to be destroyed, right? So yeah, there's really no such thing as an atheist. Atheism is just another word for religion. But I do get where you're coming from. I'm a non-Christian conservative. Well, brother, you and I at least agree on some things. The need for purpose and working towards a higher purpose is something humans desire naturally. I don't agree that they necessarily need religion in and of itself, but they definitely need something. Because Father Nurgle, the thing is, if you're not Christian, say for example, you're going to find something else to become fanatically religious about. It could be literally anything, but you're going to find something else. It will happen. I'm yet to meet a single person that after spending enough time with them, I can't go, ooh, there it is. Sometimes it's hard. I have a cousin, for example, that is not religious at all. Not even a bit. And it took a while for me to realize it, but I finally realized what their religion is. Something that a lot of people have, and they don't even realize it. It's rugby. Rugby became his religion. He watches it religiously every single Saturday. The coach of the Springboks, Rassie Erasmus, he has every book that Rassie Erasmus has ever written. He has every interview saved that Rassie Erasmus has ever conducted. He watches them for fun at least a couple of times a week, just to see if there's a bit more truth that he can find within the interview. That's his faith. That has become his faith. Doesn't make it any less faithful. He just serves somewhere else, right? My religion, they give me some. Every god is made up. Religion is just a crowd control method. And yes, Mason, so I have a couple of problems with that argument. Every god is made up. Religion is the crowd control method. Even if I didn't talk to you now as a Christian, you seem to think that religion comes first and then the culture comes second. But that doesn't necessarily logically track. For a religion to work, the culture must already be receptive to that religion. If you were to try and introduce a religion to a society that does not follow anything of that religion will not hold. It will not stand. So the idea that religion is created as a sort of psyop in order to either curtail culture or to guide culture, I think if religion was capable of doing that, then it could only be the religion of the one true God that does it. You're admitting the power of religion without calling it the power of religion, because you're effectively saying that humans invented this thing that changed the whole of society in magical ways, ways that no other system is able to do. Because we have evidence of systems that are absolutely man-made, and we see what happens as a result of those systems. They're never quite successful. They don't lead to anything that is successful. They're really bad. Look at communism. Look at the hundreds of millions of bodies that communism has racked up. And in all of the instances that communism has tried to create, it has never been able to create anything that's good. It has only ever led to suffering and prolonged suffering. Whereas if we look at Christianity, for example, does Christianity have a lot of bodies in its closets? Absolutely. Lots of people use Christianity to kill lots of people. This is true. But every example you see today of every single society that you would want to live in is a result of Christianity. Tom Holland, the historian, has a nice quote. He says, the reason people fail to realize this fact is they are fish, they are goldfish swimming in Christian waters. Now, he's making a play on a different sort of thing. It's a different element. It's a cultural concept. The cultural concept says you cannot convince a fish of water. Because for a fish, water is... right? Water is just what it is. The fish doesn't think of water as anything other than where it lives. So he's making a play on that point, saying we are all goldfish swimming in Christian waters. We don't see the effects that Christianity has had on our societies, but you wouldn't want to live anywhere else. You would not want to live in a society that was not informed by Christianity. Trust me, I know quite a few of them. They're never good. They're never good. And the retort to this that I often hear, so I'll just I'll sort of pre-work it. People will say, well, what about Japan and South Korea? They're not Christian societies. Yes, they are. You wouldn't want to live in Japan prior to the 1940s. Life was not good in Japan. You wouldn't want to live in South Korea prior to the 1950s, 60s. Life was not good there. These were incredibly oppressive, incredibly evil places. The way they treated their dissidents, the way they treated their citizens was not good. It was very evil. It's only once they westernized, once they started to accept some of the cultural truths of the West, in other words, the value of the individual, value of freedom, the value of empathy, of morality, that they are now societies that we would all love to live in, right? Japan is beautiful, and from everyone I've heard said, it's an amazing place to live. It wasn't always, right? So while it's not necessarily a Christian society, it is a society that has accepted every single virtue that Christian societies breed and follows it. Beef and Beans, I would invite you to read the book called Dominion by Tom Holland. He's an agnostic. He's not a Christian. He's not writing this as a sort of psyop to get people to become Christians. He wrote the book. He's a historian. He's world renowned. And he lays out word for word, action for action, how Christianity shaped all of Western society. How every single thing in Western society is shaped after Christianity. You saying, oh, but the days of the week are still named after dead gods. Bit childish, but also a bit laughable. because those are words. They don't mean anything. If you think for 1 second that our society is based on pagan beliefs, you clearly don't know what the pagans believe. You clearly have no idea what ancient Rome and ancient Greek was like. If you think that, oh, but this is just how we naturally were, again, you don't know your history. Christianity, when it came about, was not only awkward and weird, it was countercultural as hell. In fact, almost every single thing that Christianity, that Christ preached, was against the common practice of the day. None of them believed any of that stuff. And yet, you wouldn't want to live in ancient Greece or ancient Rome. I can tell you that. Because again, these were not good societies, and you'd only know that if you actually researched the history of those societies. Beef and beans, oh, I love it. I love it. One of my favorite things that atheists like to say is, oh, the Christians just co-opted a bunch of days that were pagan by nature, which would be fine, except you'll note they never actually have proof of it. They have someone somewhere who once upon a time said it. The earliest recorded history we have of Christmas, for example, being celebrated is in the 2nd century. So the 2nd century after Christ. The first time we find any recorded history of a pagan holiday that may have fallen on the 25th of December, and we say may because they didn't really have specific days that they would celebrate. The pagans would have sort of periods that they would celebrate. So they'd have like from this period to this period, like 2 or 3 weeks, or sometimes a couple of months that they would celebrate specific things, some religious festivals. So they didn't really have specific days that they would celebrate. But the first time we see a celebration of theirs fall on what is considered the 25th of December, and we also exactly know how they came to the 25th of December. We know exactly. Oh, I love that you said Saturnalia, because that's exactly the one we're talking about now, Beef and Beans. Thanks for making that point for me. The first actual holiday that we have of the Romans or the Greeks, it's difficult to sometimes know because they were so close together, but of the Romans actually celebrating on Christmas on the 25th of December is in the 4th century. So 200 years after the first recorded instance of the Christians celebrating Christmas. But the common belief is that, oh, but they celebrated it. The problem is the only holiday that they could somewhat have celebrated at that time would have been would have ended on the 16th of December in our current calendars, right? The holiday would have started in November, sort of the last week of November, and it would have ended around the 16th of December. So the 25th of December would be almost 10 days after their celebration ended. Their celebration didn't go into the 25th of December. That would have been way too late for their celebration to go. So all of these arguments get completely shot to hell when you actually follow the evidence. The date, also, we happen to know why Christmas falls on the 25th. They misread the calendar. Because the date was laid out in the Jewish calendar, which is not the same as the Roman calendar. So when they were trying to determine which dates should be where, they decided to, oh, we'll just do this, right? No questions asked. There were Beef and Beans, hold up. Now you're doing something strange. You're saying, well, what about the Christmas trees? Do we celebrate Christmas trees? Because I can tell you where the earliest celebration of the Christmas tree comes from and why the early Christians adopted trees to some extent, right? because Jesus was nailed on a cross. And so the early church would get wood in the form of a cross, and then they would celebrate it. Looking at the tree and going, oh, see, this must be evidence for my bullshit theory that has no actual basis in reality, because if I ask you to actually provide me with real evidence for it, not just some speculative nonsense, you wouldn't be able to. How do I know you wouldn't be able to? Because I watched actual historians, not Christian historians, actual historians go over it and go, there's literally zero evidence for this. There's no hard evidence. All of these theories come from people going, well, the Romans worshipped this person during this time. That must be how the Christians landed on it. But then that's just your theory. You need to be able to provide actual documentation for this. Like, give me an actual, historical record of them actually celebrating it on that day, or otherwise we have a problem. You simply saying, well, we have the earliest is like the 4th century, but we can sort of guess that it sort of happened earlier maybe as well. Well, now you're just guessing a bunch of stuff. Give us a recorded history of this. Like, show us how this is actually recorded. So I have a big problem with that. If you have evidence and you can actually produce the recorded documents, the manuscripts, or anything of that nature, I'd be happy to watch it and I'd be happy to read it. But every historian I have watched on this topic, even the ones that actually believe it, even the ones that actually say, well, we do kind of believe that this is where the Christians got it, all, when they're challenged and said, can you provide evidence of this? So can you provide any sort of hard evidence that this was in fact the case? They all have to admit, no, not really. We kind of have loose writings that may suggest to something like it, but we don't have any recorded history of it. The earliest recorded history we have of Jesus' birth being celebrated by Christians is in the 2nd century, which predates the earliest recorded history of the Roman celebration by 200 years. So it's far more likely that the Romans, watching the decline of their own faith, saw these Christian holidays and thought, we just need holidays as well, and then we'll bring people back to the faith. So actually, the evidence seems to suggest that it's the opposite that happened, not the way that you're reading it. So, believe what you will, but I would say do a bit more research before you just buy the theory. And I get that there's a strong reason to do that. You desperately don't want Christianity to be true. And so anything that gives you any reason to think Christianity is false is good enough for you. I would say don't worry about Christianity being true or not. Just worry about the information that you have being true. And for that, question everything. See where that gets you. In Japan, that spans multiple days, is based on Buddhism. It also believes in ancestors coming back to their homes. Yeah, but Maldi, I never made the claim that Japan is a Christian nation. I simply said that if you go to Japan prior to Christian influence, you wouldn't want to live there. It wasn't always the beautiful, forward-thinking society that it is now. It was a very different society at the time. Beef and beans, fine. Very well. If that is what you believe, then hey. Someone made the argument about medieval England and whatnot with Christianity. Poland was not Christian until year 966 or something. Yeah, Europe had a bunch of wars. Although most of Europe's wars weren't actually conversion wars, which is another common myth. People like to say that Christianity was spread through the sword. In other words, nations were captured and then forced to become religious, which is actually not true. when you look at the actual documentation, it was different strands of Christianity that were sort of fighting each other far more. Most of the actual wars that happened weren't religious wars. They were wars for territory. And as these people were conquered, slowly but surely Christianity just spread. But we actually have evidence of the Christians not even mixing with early Druids, early pagans, because they believed that they were devil worshippers, and so they didn't mix. Whether maybe some people who killed pagans because they believed them to be devil worshippers, sure. I mean, bad people exist. But we don't necessarily see forced conversion, or at least we don't see widespread evidence of forced conversion. Z Vengeance, you make one fundamental mistake. The conversation, right? So let's just take something simple. The conversation of individual rights. This was not a conversation that even existed in Japan. This is not a conversation that existed anywhere, except in Christianity. The earliest conversations we see are Christian philosophers arguing about whether or not individual peasants should be given rights. Slavery. The argument against slavery is nowhere in the world. Not a single nation on earth has any conversations about slavery except in the Christian world, where about 1,500 years ago, we see Christian philosophers asking simple questions like, if man is made in God's image, is slavery permitted under God? No other nation on earth has these conversations. The Japanese don't give a shit. They'll take slaves wherever they can get them. The South Koreans don't give a crap. Slavery is cool. The Middle Easterns couldn't give two shits. Slavery is cool. The Romans and the Greeks, they celebrated taking slaves. Their most prestigious philosophers had no interest in discussing whether or not slavery was good or bad. In fact, they celebrated it. We know because we have their writings. They didn't think slavery was bad. The only society that asks these sort of existential questions about whether or not people should be respected individually are Christian nations. Now you might say, well, but they still had slaves. Life was still bad. Peasants were still abused. Sure. But thanks to conversations that happened 1,500 years ago, today, those things are no longer acceptable in our societies. It was our nations, the West, that first said, we don't think slavery is cool. As a result of conversations that was already happening 1,500 years ago. It was our nations that abolished peasantry and feudalism because of what happened 1,000 plus years ago. So the seeds were already being planted. It took long, right? It was slow. But imagine how slow it would be in a society that never even asks the question. Well, we know. The Middle East, to this day, has slavery. Slavery has never ended in the Middle East. It still exists. So in a society where the philosophers don't even question whether or not slavery is good, slavery doesn't end. So the argument that, well, I don't think Europe was better. Life was always bad. There was always times where life was really bad. But you have to look holistically. Remember, societies change mega slowly. It doesn't happen overnight. Societies can take hundreds of years to change. in order to know the direction that a society is going to go in, it's always interesting or pertinent to look at the conversations that is happening as the society is sort of struggling or discussing the conceptuals and concepts of the day. What are their philosophers discussing? What are their philosophers talking about? What are the things that's dominating the cultural sort of landscape and the conversations around morality? Because those things will eventually become reality within that culture. Oh, beef and beans. So you asked Grok a question, and it gave you an answer that is certainly held by a number of people. Yeah, I do that all the time as well. Should I now believe it because Grok says it? Or should I look at other people that provide a lot of evidence for how that isn't true and how that isn't the case? I don't mind you believing whatever the hell you believe, right? All I'm asking you is, if you truly care about the truth, keep an open mind, good sir, and go look at the other side of that coin. Go look at the other side of that coin, because I feel like you wouldn't want to. At least that's the idea I'm getting. I feel like you've already made up your mind, and it's fine. It's fine. I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. All right, how you guys up? How you guys doing? Well, here's my free slave. Or wait, you. Why are you guys talking about Assassin's Creed now? Aren't we over that game? I mean, that game did kill an entire studio, so. We were talking about slavery a little bit. Oh, so just light conversation, in other words. Nothing too serious. Just the light, yeah, just the light slavery. Freddy, how you doing, bro? Just the light slavery conversation, you know, sort of an easy conversation. Somebody came here, Japanese feudal lords, good. European feudal lords, bad, which is a rather naive view. Chat, how prevalent were as slaves in the Second World War in Christian Europe? I have no idea. Z Vengeance, we have examples of the cruelty of Japanese feudal lords, right? We have examples of the cruelty with which the Japanese, for example, treated their prisoners. Now, that's not to say that prisoners everywhere wasn't treated pretty poorly, but the Japanese were particularly proficient at it. They were ridiculously cruel and ridiculously bad at it, right? So they really they specialized in that level of cruelty. We also know that they have, I mean, just the other day, I found out South Korea has the I don't know how much of an award this is, but it does carry the award for the nation that had the longest running slave trade in the world. It kind of had slaves long before everyone else. The only reason most people in the West don't even know about it is because most of Asia's history is kind of confined to Asia. They very rarely spread out and, you know, sort of captured other people, but they amongst themselves were causing more than enough harm and craziness for everyone. I want to see this. So we have the pissed off lawyer. What happened here? Do gay people need medication? Do gay people need to be pumped full of hormones and altered surgically? You're a homophobe. Being gay is not a medical condition. You claim being trans is. Fact, there's no biological taste market for being gay either. So using your own argument, gay people don't exist either. Once again, calling me a homophobe when I was gay longer than you've been on Earth is pure BS. And anyone with a brain could see that. People change. You changed into a homophobe. I like that. No, I didn't sit down on this one. Seriously, you don't speak for gays either. Actually, I know a lot of gay people that are sick and tired of the trans debate. I'm simply following your own logic here. Except that being homosexual is a biological reality and can be measured in nature. You're so homophobic and you're transphobic bigot. Oh, wow. That's the mark of someone that's winning the argument. When they immediately go to bigot, you know they've just won that argument. But here's why I wanted to read this. Yes, I am transphobic. I hate the ideology that destroyed my life, my health, robbed me of my body parts, and has done the same to my friends and many, many in my generation. I hate the ideology that tells lesbians they need to be pumped full of chemicals and cut up and sleep with men. I hate the ideology that enables predatory men to enter my daughter's spaces. You're right. Ooh, that's not good. When in doubt, shut and shout. LGBT is a fancy new term for an Ouroboros of ideologies. Means to cut tiny bits of flesh. First time started or Slavic and answers. Wait, did I just start a full-blown culture war in my chat? Is that what we're doing here? Like, is everyone arguing about this now? Why are we talking about colonialism? And I love this chat. I'm lost at the moment as to what you guys are discussing, but have at it, boys. Dude, I wish we still lived during those times. I wish we still lived during those times. Hold up. So wait, this is one hell of a letter though. Like, I will read this on my own time. I have it here. I just bookmarked it. Beef and beans. But there's a couple of things I would have to read around this, as well as the purposes of the letter. So, for example, if you have a society, right, that's already starting to become a lot more Christian, then perhaps, okay, so just gonna point out something here, all right? You have a society that's already becoming Christian. Now you're the Pope. Now, to be fair, I don't believe in the Pope, but you're the Pope, and you hear these things about Christians going around smashing up the pagan temples in order to build churches in its place. And the reason they're doing it is they believe that these pagan temples are evil and filled with Satan, and so as a result, these things cannot stand. So now, you, the Pope, write a letter to the Christians saying, boys, it's just a building. You don't need to smash it up. You don't need to do all of this stuff over again. Just turn it into a church and continue going. It's just a building, because as Christians, we do believe that it's just a building. It's not anything holy. The holiness comes from the saints that's inside of it and their worship, not from the building itself. So I would need to see all of these sort of all of these arguments around it. The issue is what you're trying to do, Beef and Beans, and this is where the issue comes in. I'm not saying you're necessarily trying to do this, but everyone I've ever debated on this, what they try and shoehorn in is they're trying to say, well, Christianity is actually just a collection of pagan beliefs, which is completely untrue. Because if you look at what the pagans believed and you look at what Christians believe, they're not the same. Like, there's no evidence that these things are even remotely the same. Right? Now, if the only argument you try to make is the Pope saying to early Christians, hey, be kind to the pagans, ease them into it, show them the love of our Lord and of the faith. Don't smash up their stuff, don't destroy their stuff, but show them who Christ is. Yeah, no worries. Right? I have no problem with that. I'm sure that is a better way to go about it rather than just kill a bunch of people. But that still doesn't turn the faith into paganism. How do we know this? Because we know how the early pagans lived. We know what life in ancient Rome was like. And every single teaching of Jesus, every single teaching of Paul and Peter and the apostles went against what the Roman church or the Roman pagan beliefs were of the time. None of them were sort of borrowed from those pagan faiths. This is why the pagans, the Romans, hunted and killed countless Christians. The Christians were persecuted eventually almost daily. You had Christians being killed by the thousands as the pagans were trying to kill this newfound religion that they viewed as a challenge to their own gods. And this was because the Christians were preaching something that was radically different to what the pagans of the time believed. Hey, Darkins, how you doing, bro? Who the hell do you want to invade now, Z Vengeance? What the hell? Okay, so I am causing international incidents now in chat. This is insane. I'm just over here streaming on Twitch, having a good time. Meanwhile, in a few months from now, there's going to be news articles written about how I radicalized a bunch of young men to start the next world war in Europe. As, you know, countries started invading each other because they want to colonize each other again. And I was just over here having a good time. Some people are like modern day Czechs want reparations for that. Absolutely. You had people in your chat radicalizing Ukraine, invading Europe. Oh, shit. So wait, Ukraine not only needs to deal with Russia, but now it has to invade Europe? That's nuts. But that would be a strange twist of fate, though. Imagine everyone is being so afraid of Russia invading Europe, and no one sees Ukraine just turning around and invading Europe. That'd be funny as hell. Organizes 21st Century Crusade says we must save the Holy Land from itself. Do you think white people will ever stand up for themselves against the insane anti-white racism that has been sweeping all of the West? Yeah. I think right now, the reason you're not really seeing it as sort of a widespread thing where, you know, white people are standing up is because I genuinely don't think it's that widespread. In real life, most people really aren't dealing with this stuff. Not really. And so for most people, it doesn't even matter. A lot of these wars are being fought on, shall we say, sort of the extreme elements of the internet, right? Where it doesn't really affect most people's lives. Where this will become a problem is the second it does start influencing people's lives, specifically on a big scale. That's when you'll see ordinary Europeans rise up and go, enough is enough. We've now, I think if there's one nation that I will look at and say it's probably getting to that point, it's England. I think Britain is very close to seeing a almost Reformation level event that's going to happen, because its government has decided to take online discourse into the real world. So now the government is hounding ordinary people into silence, into locking people up for saying things that they don't necessarily agree with, sort of taking hate speech laws and dialing it up to 11. So the first nation that may actually experience it will be the UK. In the rest of Europe, there's obviously problems, but a lot of the problems is mostly just online stuff. It doesn't really affect people in the real world. So most Europeans will just sort of whatever, because it barely affects them. You sort of need a couple of things for people to really stand up. The first is the belief that nothing will change. So the second people get into a place where they no longer apathy. That's the word I'm looking for. Apathy is the biggest enemy of order. The second people reach a point of apathy, and specifically when they become politically apathetic, you have to be very worried. Through all the research that we have of civil wars, of insurrections and all the like, the one thing that we can track throughout all of it is political apathy. Usually, like about a decade before the Civil War breaks out, you start to see people just stop voting, stop wasting their time, just whatever, because it's not going to make a difference. I think the UK is sort of in that spot now where voted for the Conservatives, nothing changed. Voted for the Liberals, nothing's changing. I think the final nail in the coffin will be if the British vote for reform. So say reform wins the next election and then nothing changes. That will probably be the end. That's when you'll see true political apathy. And once apathy sets in, you can start counting the days. Within the next decade, you'll have a civil war because people have realized voting doesn't change anything. If voting doesn't change anything, true violence is the only real answer. The Southport riots kind of showed it. So you're already seeing riots and stuff happening. It literally all depends on, were the riots still to some extent politically motivated? In other words, it was the people's attempt to tell the politicians to start doing the right thing. Like I said, apathy is the problem. Riots is still somewhat fine because it shows you people still believe that they might have a way to change the system. Where you want to start worrying is when there's no riots. There's nothing. People don't do shit. That's when you want to start worrying. There were no riots for Nazism prior to Hitler's conversion to power. The Nazis weren't walking around rioting in the streets. They had already decided that there was nothing to do. There was no way to change this. They needed something radical. And that's sort of that's when you have to start worrying. It's when people stop rioting because they don't believe that it will help. Because the next step is, if we really want something to change, we have to take it by force. Nice darkness, I wouldn't say that. Thus far, seeing everything Trump is doing, it feels like he's doing everything for everyone. Doesn't seem like he's specifically trying to help out one group. It seems like he's trying to make the whole world, or at least the whole of America, good for everyone. I don't see a lot of his policies being specifically aimed at women or at any one specific group, more just trying to make America good, which is what I would want. I don't want a leader that caters to white people only, because that creates a problem again to the other side. Because now you're just setting up the next big push from the other side. I want a leader that just does what's good for everyone and lets people live their life, however they want to do it. Deliver. I've been a supporter of Trump since 2016, but at this point, every politician is a PDF file until proven otherwise. Beef and beans. It is my understanding, Freya, how you doing? But it is my understanding that Trump wants the Epstein list released. There is either Bondi that doesn't release it, which may be a problem. Something's happening there. But the last time I heard anything, now this was a while ago, so things may have changed since. But the last time I heard anything was that they were having a seriously hard time getting all of the documents out of the whichever FBI field office has the documents, like the full unredacted documents. It seems like this agency or this field office just desperately doesn't want to hand shit over. Now, things may have changed in the meantime. But didn't Trump just recently say that they're going to release the Epstein list? I think just recently he said they are going to do it. I have no idea. I do want to say, though, are you referring, is there anything I did not see? Because the only sort of policy or executive order that Trump signed that was specifically targeted at women was the removal of trans women from female sports, which overwhelmingly is a male issue. It's most women are happily giving their rights away. It's men that's saying, what the hell are you doing? Right. So I would say that was passed way more for men than what it was passed for women. Because if I look on my timeline, at least, it looks like women are more than happy to give all their shit away. G Vengeance, you might be right. But I think Maximo expresses it good here, where he says there's a case currently against Maine. Is this for the Epstein list, Maximo? Rakan, I didn't see that. I wouldn't be surprised, though. I wouldn't be surprised. Although I think India would be making a mistake. My government seems hell-bent on doing everything in its power to upset the United States government. So any country that is doing, every country that is doing business with South Africa might be in trouble. Because all my country has to do is apologize and stop their nonsense. And what my country does is literally the opposite. Like, we just had our ambassador expelled from the United States because our ambassador, as the ambassador, sat in the official position as ambassador and told the world that Trump is a Nazi. Like, literally, on the internet, said that Trump is a Nazi. As the ambassador of a country, you have no right to say that. None. Zero. Even if that's what you privately believe, you cannot make personal statements because as the ambassador of a country, you literally represent that country. So then the ambassador was expelled, rightfully so. Now, because America is really fed up with South Africa, my country decided to put together a special envoy. They're going to send a special envoy to Washington to try and smooth things over. The leader of this special envoy, just last month, called Trump literally Hitler and a fascist wannabe dictator. And I said, wow. You couldn't have found anyone that hasn't publicly insulted the president of the most powerful nation on earth? This is your response? This is the guy that's gonna have to smooth things over? Wow, dude, South Africa is getting far worse treatment from Vance than Zelensky ever did. At least Zelensky was allowed into the Oval Office. About a month and a half ago, a special envoy from South Africa was dispatched to Washington, D.C. Guess what happened? They couldn't even get a meeting with low-tier congressmen and senators. Because here's the big problem for South Africa. Democrats and Republicans are united on their hatred of South Africa. They don't like South Africa. Not even the Democrats give a shit about South Africa. So they couldn't even get Democratic senators and congressmen to listen to them. So yeah, I don't know. My country isn't even getting the opportunity to go into the White House. Oh yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think America is doing absolutely the right thing. I think the rest of the world needs to wake up to one fundamental truth, and that is that South Africa is not your friend. The ANC hates Europe and hates America because the ANC is a communist government. It doesn't like Europe. It views you as colonizers and imperialists. It's happy to take whatever money you give it. If you offer them $5 billion, they're going to take it. But they're not going to do what you think they're going to do. They're not going to do what you ask them to do. They'll take the money, and then they'll waste that money on whatever they want, screw what you want. So I think the best thing the rest of the world can do for South Africa is to drop South Africa. Oh yeah, this I saw. And I think India is doing... This is why I told you guys BRICS is a joke. This is why anyone that thinks BRICS is an actual challenge to American authority is out of their minds. See, because India didn't join BRICS because it hates the United States of America. India doesn't mind the United States. India joined BRICS because it was a way to make cheap money. And now India is seeing the perfect opportunity to say to international investors, hey boys, come to India. We'll build your shit for you. We have more people than China has. We have a free market where you can do business in whichever way you want. We don't have labor laws, so you can treat your workers whichever way you want. Come open your business here. And as far as I know, the Indian president or prime minister also basically did everything Trump asked of him. So they're going to be able to get a zero tariff deal with America in no time flat. Mention you're always gonna have, like, some people that go one way or the other, but in terms of like India's business environment, it is super capitalistic. Okay, it is almost laissez-faire capitalist. Its business environment is sort of like whatever you want to do it. Which might have it's gonna make the country beyond rich, but it will probably lead to suffering down the road. Laissez-faire capitalism does create some problems. Mention, oh yeah, because remember, India isn't fighting an ideological battle. It's not trying to hold on to its communism whilst also making money out of the rest of the world. It doesn't care about any of these things. Moving to India, Apple saw this way ahead of time. So my pastor just sent me a voice note about the question I asked him earlier. Kimmy, you asked me to ask my pastor. If a couple is married from a different religion and then become Christian, whether or not they should be remarried in the Christian faith.
Waarschijnlijk beide beginnen als ongelowiges. Een wordt gered. Dan wordt het steeds geag as 'n huwelik. Of dit nou binne die kerk gebeur het of nie. Tipies is die vereiste vir 'n huwelik iets wat deur sommige mense gedebatteer word, maar oor die algemeen is dit 'n ooreenkoms tussen twee families dat 'n man en vrou ewe getrou mekaar sweer en dat daardie huwelik dan consummate word deur fisiese aktiwiteit. Dis maar hierdie eeue wat dit verteenwoordig het en die feit dat ons uiteindelijk die huwelik het, dat dit opereer so.
All right, so I'll listen to the rest of his message. But to answer the question, if two people, say for example, are Muslim and get married and then become Christian, the official answer from my pastor, at least, is marriage is not a church institution. It is viewed as part of the creation order. So marriage, even though as Christians we get married before God, marriage was given to all people everywhere, regardless of whether or not they are Christian. So no matter what your culture, no matter what your faith, man and woman together getting married, this is part of the creation order. So therefore, if you are Christian, if you become Christian later on, you are not required to get married again. You are married. It doesn't matter whether it's in front of the church or not in front of the church. Marriage is not a religious or a church institution. It's part of the creation order. To answer that question, because I can't remember who asked me, but someone asked me and I said, I'll find out for you. Grofel, I don't know. I didn't like the first Oblivion, so I'm not sure if I'll play the second one. Might be worth a go, but I'm not a fan of Bethesda games. I find Bethesda games bad. At least I'm not a huge fan of the way Bethesda tells stories. Yeah, I never played Skyrim. And it makes sense. Yeah, he's probably going to go on and explain even more, but he does basically brings up Corinthians, Kimmy, where he says Paul was asked in Corinthians, what do we do? Because remember, when you're married, you're not allowed to get divorced. So a lot of the Christians from the Corinthian church were asking Paul, well, what do we do? Because I became a Christian, but my husband isn't a Christian, or the husband would say, I became a Christian, but my wife isn't a Christian. Am I supposed to get divorced? Right? Like, what's the right thing to do here? And Paul says, no. Marriage is sacred, regardless of Christian or not. If you're married, you cannot get divorced. So Paul says there, if you're a believer and your wife isn't a believer, you cannot divorce her because you don't know whether or not your faith will save her. So whether or not she'll become a Christian as a result of your faith. The only time that divorce is permitted between Christian and non-Christian is if the non-Christian person cannot accept being married to a Christian. So if the wife who isn't Christian says to her husband, unless you go back to atheism, I don't want to be married to you anymore, then you're allowed to get divorced. Because you cannot force that person to be married to someone that they don't wish to be married to. But if the wife or the husband is fine being married to a Christian, even if they're not Christian, then that marriage is still blessed by God and therefore cannot just be torn asunder. So that's at least the answer up until the point that I listened. 2 women initiating divorce 90% of the time. No, divorce is absolutely unacceptable in our church. So if to give you an example, if you're in the church and you get divorced for no reason, so you just decide you want to get divorced, you're instantly placed under church discipline, in my church at least. Instantly. There's no questions asked. Because you're sinning. You're not, your partner didn't cheat on you, didn't abuse you, so you have no grounds to get divorced here. Anyway, there's this guy on YouTube doing an ethno-linguistic deep history of the East and North Europe currently. And then you are held harmless because they don't want you and your religion. Kimmy, yes. So from Paul's perspective, you are not to blame for that. Because remember, there's also a bunch of stuff that comes into, should you, so say for example, you were married and then you got divorced and now I marry you. That makes you an adulterer and me an adulterer. Because remember, you cannot tear apart what God has bound. So even though you left your husband, you're still bound to your husband. So if I sleep with you, I have now committed adultery because I am not bound to you. So this is why we're given specific instances where if your husband cheats on you, that breaks the bond of marriage. So God breaks the bond of marriage there, and you are free. If abuse happens, the bond is broken because men are told to love their wives as Christ loved the church. So if a husband isn't doing that, he's broken the breach, or he's broken the agreement, the bond, and therefore you are free. Or if the husband says, I cannot accept your faith, then the bond is also broken. What does your church say about fasting? It doesn't have a fast rule, right? It's not like you have to fast, but a lot of people in my church believe that it's good. So they'll fast at various times. You don't really know when they fast. It's not like they tell people. But they do believe that it is important. That it can be good for you. So, it's not like a rule. The one thing about my church, there's not a lot of like sort of clear-cut traditions, right? That's laid down, and on this day, all of us are going to do this thing. It's more just, Stan, how you doing, bro? It's more a case of they tell you what is good, right? And what is the value in certain things, and then they allow you to make your decision of how you wish to interact with these things in your own life. The only absolute requirement to be in my church is to be born again. And if I want to become a member, I have to be baptized, which I have not been. I was baptized as a baby, but my church doesn't accept pedo baptism as a legitimate form of baptism. So, Kimmy, there would be an immediate question about the legitimacy of that faith. And normally people who come to faith out of fear, that faith doesn't last long. Because the thing is, being a Christian isn't easy. It's not the easy life, right? At no point do you, because being a Christian means fighting every natural desire you have, because you recognize that your natural desires are sinful. And so whatever you desire, you have to do the opposite of that. So being a Christian is hard. If you don't have the Holy Spirit guiding you, you will not be able to live that way. It would be impossible. You will constantly fall, and eventually it will just become too hard. So people who exist, or people who become Christian purely out of fear, first, you're probably not going to see a lot of fruit of Christ in their hearts, right? So they're not going to live a Christ-like life, and eventually they'll just give up. Or what very often happens is they become deconstructionists. So if you listen to deconstructionists, most deconstructionists today don't even worship God. Like, not the God of the Bible. But they still want to call themselves Christian because they're afraid of going to hell. And so they deconstruct the Bible so that the Bible fits their lifestyle. That way, they get the assurance that they're going to go to heaven because, hey, I'm a Christian. But they can also do whatever the hell they want because, hey, I'm a Christian, So yeah, I would say I'm usually not too worried about that. It's not a faith that lasts. Adult decision is what they mean, right? Mason, what do you mean? I would like to ask your pastor what advice he has for young men who want to get married but are afraid of all the horrible laws in divorce courts. So highest darkness. My pastor would not care about that at all. I've spoken to him about this before. The laws in the divorce courts mean nothing if the wife you have is a godly woman. If you find a wife that is a godly woman, that loves you as God commands her to love you, it doesn't matter how many laws the world has or how many divorce courts exist, she's not going to turn to those. She's not going to waste her time with those. So, yeah, they're incredibly pro-marriage in my church. As much as it sort of makes me feel a bit uneasy, I know for a fact that almost every single person in my church is praying for me nonstop to get married, that God will send me a wife and that I will get married, because they don't like the fact that I'm single, because a man shouldn't be single. We weren't made to be single. I know this because I've been told to pray for other people that are single in the church, so that they may find someone. In our church, for example, young people are encouraged to get married. I don't mean young as like 15, 16. I mean young as in 19, 20, 21. We don't do the whole dating thing. Dating is not a thing in our church. In fact, there's a lot of people that view dating as sinful because you're opening the door to sin. The longer you date, the better the chances that you're going to sin at some point. They view dating as a waste to marriage. So you only date for as long as you need to know this is my wife, and then you ask her to marry and you get married. End of discussion, right? In fact, most of the people I know in my church that have been married for all of them 20 plus years knew their wives for less than 6 months before they got married. Like, literally, less than 6 months, asked to marry, got married a couple of months later. And they've been married for 20 plus years now. So yeah, dating is definitely not a big thing, at least in our church. To me, I would say there's a difference between I don't know if you're asking for yourself, or maybe asking for someone else or whatever, right? But I would say if the fear that you have, right, is, am I truly saved? That's a fear that a lot of Christians go through during the start. Because there's a lot of questions, a lot of stuff you don't know. But if the fear is, I just don't want to go to hell, you don't understand, right? If that is why you're a Christian, then the bad news is you're probably going to hell. Because the point is to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And you should want that. And you should ask God to create that for you. To create that personal relationship, that you can know him and that he can know you, and that you can grow with him and that you can become what he wants you to be. So I would say if it is something that you're struggling with yourself, I would ask God to change your heart, because you should in no way, shape, or form be afraid of going to hell. That should not even register to you. I'm at a place where if I did go to hell, it would be because I deserved it. Then God made the right choice. So I'm not afraid of going to hell. Although I used to be. There was a time where I was very afraid of that. But then I became an atheist and I was no longer afraid of that. Love this stream today. I leave for an hour and come back and we're still talking about Jesus. My man preaching the good word. Jody B, welcome back, good sir. Welcome back. Might be more fun in hell, who knows? Well, we don't know much about what's happening in hell, but think about who you'll be joined with there. And then realize that the things that may have kept people's sort of demons at bay don't exist there. So you'll be handed over to the mercy of some of the most evil and vile people you have ever imagined, and then imagine that the demons are a million times worse, and you'll be at their mercy. You'll be answering to them. And there will be no, God isn't there. That's the whole point of it. God has purposefully removed himself from it. In fact, and by the way, here I have a completely different, this is just my own opinion on it, but it seems like if I read Revelations correctly, there's a point at which God takes hell right at the end, after the judgment. He takes hell and he throws it, as well as its inhabitants, into the eternal lake of fire. Now, you should think about fire not as fire, the way that you and I think about it, but you should think about it like this. If I read this correctly, it means that if you die and you go to hell now, you are at the mercy of the rulers of hell. So you're at the mercy of Satan and the demons. But because God is merciful and because God is just, even to those who rejected him, after the final judgment, what God will do is God will devise your punishment for you. So that's what that means when God says, I will throw it into the lake of fire. In other words, rather than being completely left to the mercy of the demons, as well as all of the inhabitants of hell, will now get their just punishment, as the mercy of God. So I know for a fact it's not a good place. It's definitely not a place you want to be in. The reason I don't like talking about hell, and I don't like spending too much time talking about hell, is I don't want people to believe purely because they're afraid of hell. Because that's not true faith. That's not true faith. Now, if you sort of go, man, I really don't want to go to hell, I best check out this religion thing, different story, right? The fear motivated you to search for the truth. That's a different story. But I don't want to use fear as a way to try and get people to become Christian, because that's not true Christianity. You shouldn't care at all about what the what the hell is or what hell has to offer for you. In a messed up song by Immortal Technique that says hell is not a place you go if you're not a Christian, it's the failure of your life's greatest ambition. I love that line. God doesn't send people to hell, we send ourselves there if we haven't accepted the Lord, if we haven't done right by those who love him, by him. That guilt is what locks us in. It's our choice. Oh yeah, I absolutely agree with that, right? I don't. What I always find interesting is when I speak to atheists, and some atheists will say, how would a loving God send people to hell? And I go, wait, but you chose hell. I don't understand. You had every opportunity on earth to believe in God. All of the evidence is right there in front of you. You just need to look, right? You decided, in spite of all of the evidence, to go, screw you, I don't want to believe in you. But now somehow he's the bad guy for honoring your wish. I mean, you didn't want to spend time with him while you were alive. Why would he force you to be with him after you're dead? This would be evil, right? You made a choice. He's just honoring that choice. I struggle with belief purely because I don't want to fake it. I do truly believe there is a higher power, though. Overall, I live life trying to be good. Maniac, so you can't be good. We spoke about this a little earlier in the stream. When you ask people, do you think you're good? Generally, people will answer and they'll say, yeah, I think I'm good. The next question that you should ask yourself is, compared to who? Because you'll note that oftentimes people will say, I'm good, when they compare themselves to the worst people they know, or just not the perfect people they know. So they'll be like, well, my neighbor sleeps around and cheats on his wife. I don't do that, therefore I must be good. The issue there is you're comparing your own immoral behavior to another immoral being. If you were to flip that and say, I am good compared to God, now you have a problem. Because now you realize, oh, I'm not good at all. And since God is good, like literally God is the definition of good, you have to compare yourself to God. Like the only way you can be good is if you are like God. In other words, sin has no place in your life. You never hurt anyone. You never say anything mean. You never say anything you don't agree with, anything you don't believe. You never lie. You never steal. You never cheat. You never look at another woman that doesn't belong to you. You never have sexual impure thoughts. So all of these things you have to have. If you have all of these things, then you can claim to be good. If you don't have all of these things, then you yourself are not good. So then you realize that, hold on, the pursuit of trying to be good is a fool's errand. You're not called to be good. You're called to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Being good, that's God's realm. Have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and God will do the sanctification work within you. Being good is difficult, especially when you realize what, like, I always say, Jesus came to earth to be the example of what we need to be. The only problem I have with that is I can't even be like Paul. And Paul was a normal human. Like, there's nothing special about Paul. But Paul, for example, says, I think about the good stuff and then I've already done the sin. I don't even always think about the good stuff. I just think about the sin and then I do it. So Jesus is the perfect example of how I should be, but I can't even be like Paul. So what's lucky is that I'm not told that unless I can be like Jesus, I will not go to heaven. I'm simply told that I have to believe in Jesus, that I have to submit to Jesus, and that I have to have a personal relationship with Jesus. The being like Jesus, that's just something I strive for, and I hope that it happens for me. It won't happen, not on this earth, because salvation, sanctification, glorification. Glorification happens once you go to heaven. I'm not good. I'm trying to be good enough to make whatever judges me at the end at least go, man. Caleb, so if I'm correct and God sits at the end, I'll tell you guys a story. This story was, I heard this story from what's his name? He's dead now, I believe, but he was like a very well-known pastor for a long time. He's a very, very good pastor. But I'll tell you this story. It's a question that people ask as part of the sort of evangelical profession, right? So evangelicals or people that evangelize will go to people and they'll ask them, if you die today and you stand in front of the Almighty Judge, what will you tell him, right? Or what will you say? if he asks, why should I let you into heaven? So if God asks you, why do you think you should go to heaven? What will you tell him? Now, the reason they ask this question is it reveals the heart of the person you're speaking to. Because most people will answer, I lived a good life. I did some good stuff. I didn't steal. I didn't murder. I didn't do, sort of the sort of whatever, right? And that's sort of the question that they get. So that's the question that they ask, and the answers that they get is always some sort of variety of answers, right? So one day, he purely out of nowhere asks his son. Now, his son at the time is about 9 years old. And he asks his son, he's like, so I want to ask you something. Imagine you died today and you were at the gates of heaven and God asks you, why should I let you in? And he says his son looks at him sort of confused, not really sure like what the question is. And after a while, his son goes, because I'm dead. That's the right answer. That's the right answer. Where else am I supposed to go? I'm dead. Like, dude, come on. That's how it works. All of your good works, all of your beautiful works, all of the nice stuff you do, it doesn't matter. Those things matter nothing to God. God couldn't care less about the good stuff that you think you did, because they weren't good to God. God cares about your heart. And that young boy's answer, because I'm dead, speaks volumes. I believe in you. I'm a Christian. Where else am I supposed to go? Right? This is where I'm supposed to be. I'm dead. Get me in. Jody, yeah. But remember, this is part of evangelical work, right? So this question that they ask is to see what the mind is of the person that they're speaking to. Where is this person, right? Because if you're asking that question to someone and they go, I'll tell God to kiss my ass or whatever, there's no conversation that you can have there, right? That person is completely closed to the faith. If you're talking to someone and they do go well, I lived a good life, I did this, it gives you an angle from which to start the conversation, right? Because it might be that you're talking to a Christian, but it's clear from their answer, they don't understand what it means to be a Christian. They think that they have to live a good life. People sort of fall into this trap of thinking that we can bargain with God, right? So I live a good life, you let me into heaven. It's not a bargain. Access to God's kingdom is not transactional. You cannot buy your way into it through good works. There is only one way to get there, and that is through Jesus Christ. If you don't have Jesus, you cannot go in. He is the key. So that's that's the purpose of the question, is to figure out whether or not people view God as a transactional God. Sort of like you get people that do this. I did this until very recently, and I caught myself doing it. Although I think it was revealed to me. I would pray on a transactional level. So I would think, if I pray hard enough, I will get it. Whatever I ask for, I will get. That's transactional. That's not how it works. You'll get exactly what God wants to give you. And what you deserve, right? And what you think you deserve is not necessarily what you deserve. Jody, I tell you what, I am grateful that I am not judged on what I do or don't do. Because I mean, holy crap, do I struggle with sin. All manner of sin. It's hard. It's mega hard. I'm assuming the bar to get into heaven is not something I can interpret, or I'm respecting the system judgment to determine my entry. Caleb, I'm assuming the bar to get into heaven is not something I can interpret, or I'm respecting the system judgment to determine my entry. No, the bar to entry is pretty. I would say the bar to entry is incredibly low. It's not hard to go to heaven. In fact, I would argue it's harder to go to hell. Because to go to hell, you have to purposefully ignore all of the evidence for God, ignore all of your natural instinct to believe in something bigger than yourself. Whereas to go to heaven, you literally just need to believe in Jesus Christ. That's it, right? You just have to believe in Jesus. You just have to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior and have a personal relationship with him. And you're in. I would say the bar could not be lower. It could not be easier to get into heaven. And yet, we're told that the gate is narrow and that few ever walk through that gate. Trickstar, how you doing? So, Trickstar, firstly, the argument you're making, right, is effectively can be boiled down to God's mercy is unfair. Which is true. God's mercy is unfair. But it's only unfair because you and I don't know what fair is. Our own version of fairness is so warped and twisted that we don't understand what true mercy actually looks like. So the first thing you have to come to a realization to is that you judging God for his mercy is foolish because you're the flawed one, not him. Okay, so that's the first thing you have to accept. Moreover, if you understood how sin affects God, you would understand why for God, the tiny little white lie that you're telling, or the guy that is, roofing girls' drinks, that has no effect from God's perspective in terms of your sinful nature. Because the sin affects the world, right? And affects God's character. Both of these things are sins against God. Now, here's where things change, and this is what a lot of agnostics don't always understand, what I even struggle to understand. While the sin affects God in the same way, right? God hates both of those sins equally. The effect that those sins have on the sinner is vastly different. So the person that tells a white lie, the white lie will have an effect on their soul, will affect on their physical, but it won't have as big of an effect as the guy that roofies goals. See, after a while of the guy roofing goals, the guy's ability to come to Christ will become almost impossible. So, for example, Adolf Hitler, if in that bunker moments before he took the poison or before he got blown up, whatever the case might be. In that moment, if Adolf Hitler said, "Jesus, forgive me," he would go to heaven. That's what the Bible teaches. He would go to heaven. His sins would be forgiven him. But that's assuming that he even would ask that. See, by the time that Adolf Hitler takes that final step, the very act of his final step tells you he would never have asked for forgiveness. He was so hell-bent on not apologizing for what he had done. He was so sure and hardened within himself that he would rather kill himself than be captured and forced to apologize. See, so he had no ability to ever ask for forgiveness or salvation or mercy. He couldn't care less. He was evil to the core. And that's the difference. Every single time you sin, you remove yourself further from God. Now, I do believe that certain sins move people further away from God than other sins do. Some of your sins move you maybe a couple of inches. Still easy to get back. You might still see the light. Some of your sins move yourself so far from God that it becomes impossible to see the light. And you eventually just get caught up in that sin. And that sin becomes all-consuming. But the mercy of God is that he does not pick favorites. He doesn't have some sins that he views as a little bit this or a little bit that. If God was fair, truly fair, right? From my perspective, from my viewpoint, we would all go to hell because none of us are perfect. So I agree with you. God's mercy is unfair. Because the fact that he chose to save me, I don't deserve it. Not one bit. There's nothing in me that deserves that. And this is not something I understood until I understood sin. Until I understood just how sinful I was and is. The issue is we think of sin as tiny things. And then we think of other sins as like big things. Like murder is a huge sin, but, sleeping with your girlfriend before marriage, how big can that be? But I think one of the things that I sort of, and this is still sort of workshopped, so, this is just my opinion. The reason sin is such a big issue for God isn't the physical attribute of the sin. It's what that sin does in the spiritual realm. So think about and sort of sex has a lot to do with this theory. We know that as Christians, we are commanded to only ever have sex inside marriage. Sex outside of marriage is considered a sin. You can't do it. We also know that sex is how two souls are tied together, is through sex. So clearly, there is a physical component to sex, but there is also a spiritual component to sex. Another weird thing is that demons who are purely of the spiritual realm, we know from the Bible, came down and had sex with the woman of man. So clearly sex, the physical component to it, has a spiritual component as well. And there's a good chance that every sin has that spiritual component to it. And that is what God hates, is the spiritual component. Because the one component isn't larger than the other. And if you think about the fact that there's at least some evidence to suggest that every sin that you have feeds a specific demon on the other side. Right? So there are demons of sloth and demons of lies and demons of murder and demons of this. Every time you tell a little white lie, whether it's a big lie, a white lie, whatever it is, that lie feeds evil. It breeds more demons on the other side. So from God's perspective, whether you murder someone or whether you lie to someone, the effect you have in the spiritual realm is of equal. It's an equal sin. Now, even with that, I don't believe that God punishes all sinners equally. I don't believe that. And I think there is evidence in the Bible to suggest that hell is not equal for everyone all the time. Your punishment is certainly fitting of the crimes that you committed. So even though, right, the good living atheist goes to hell and Hitler goes to hell, Hitler's hell is going to be much worse than the goodest or goodie atheist's hell. Because I believe God is merciful and just. And I believe that our justice system is based on God's mercy and God's justice. And as humans, we have the ability to differentiate between some crimes that maybe deserve, 10 years in prison and other crimes that deserve capital punishment. So yeah, that's sort of how I view it, at least. Are some sins not different though? Ice darkness, so sin is different in terms of the impact that it has on believers, right? Paul makes this distinction. Paul says, beware of all sin, but guard specifically against sexual immorality and unnatural sexual desires. Sexual immorality is having sex outside of wedlock. Unnatural desires, as was understood by every Jew that heard it, is homosexuality. Right? Paul says guard against these two. But then Paul explains why. It's not that these two sins are bigger or worse than the others physically. It's that these two sins also impact the flesh. The flesh is involved in these two sins. And so if you engage in these sins, you risk basically sort of activating the flesh as a result of it. So the flesh becomes almost addicted to these hormonal releases of these sins. And so Paul says, guard against these sins most. Because they involve this, they're not just against the soul, but also against the flesh. But I don't necessarily believe that there are different sins. I know the Catholic Church has the 7 deadly sins and stuff. I don't necessarily believe that exists. I think all sin is equal in front of God. Crimes that deserve, you get sent to El Salvador. Dude, the president of El Salvador seems to love sending people to prison. Like, it seems like just watching that interview between him and Trump, he seemed ecstatic at being able to send people to prison. Like, it's like his favorite thing in the whole world is sending people to prison. Which is crazy. So have you seen the Google satellite photos that look like bodies stacked up with giant bloodstains at that prison? Trickstar, I have not. I have not seen it. I I would not be necessarily surprised, though. I would not be surprised. And the reason I wouldn't be surprised is I think that president, the president of El Salvador, seems, at least from what I can tell, willing to do everything and anything to get the gangs out of his country. And I wouldn't be surprised if the death penalty is part of that. That he doesn't give a crap. And you have to take your hat off to this guy, because he has turned El Salvador from the murder capital of the world into arguably one of the safest nations currently, at least in South America. Valias, how you doing? So, Trickstar, one thing that I've learned, and why I don't trust random YouTube videos anymore on this topic, I have seen so many lies on every side, by the way. I have watched people defend Israel with absolute lies. I have watched people defend Palestine with absolute lies. I have watched people attack Trump with absolute lies. I've watched people defend Trump with absolute lies. I have watched people defend Russia with super lies. I've watched people defend Ukraine with super lies. At this point, I just don't know. The one thing I do know is that it is a government's job, if a government is going to have any job, to enforce morality, to lead with just and moral authority. Gang members are immoral, so if a bunch of gang members are killing each other or getting killed by the government, then so be it. Like, I don't care. Because I don't believe that prisoners deserve human rights. I just don't. You committed crimes. What gives you the right to any rights? You're a criminal for a reason. Right? If you wanted rights, how about you don't commit crimes, and then we don't have to worry about any of this nonsense? But since you did commit crimes, I think you deserve no rights. Now, we could maybe have an argument about what kind of crimes are we talking about? Because do I think someone that stole a loaf of bread suddenly doesn't deserve any rights? No, of course not, right? So some crimes might be a little less problematic. But I look at, for example, even theft. If we're just talking about theft, you have some of these white-collar criminals that basically stole millions of dollars from old people, cleaning them out, right, in such a way that most of them are ruined for the rest of their lives. Does that person deserve human rights after the suffering that they have caused? To me, this whole movement of prisoner rights and humans, prisoners have human rights, seems like misplaced empathy. Why are we showing people who have purposefully broken the social code? Why are we showing them oftentimes more sort of, why do we give them more leeway and more rights than even you and I necessarily have? Right? So in a lot of cases, you and I don't even have those rights. Valias, the issue is you can't, at least from my perspective, the way I approach everything is I think about things logically. I think about what makes the most sense in this regard. and I don't arrive at fundamental conclusions. So I'm always open to changing my mind. If someone can deliver or give a good enough argument for something, I'll change my mind. But yeah, the problem is every single video I see, every single article I watch, it's one of the reasons I try to put so much effort into my videos of at least covering the story as honest as possible, because I'm obviously biased and I'm going to have my own biases that does reflect in the video. But my hope is that I at least do enough work that I'm providing a good enough analysis of the situation. I see a lot of people not doing that. Like, a lot of people just go with whatever they read first. Well, it works in the USA. If you are convicted of a felony, any felony, you do lose certain rights, the right to vote, to own a gun, etc. Valius, I would argue if you're convicted of a crime, you should lose all rights. You know, you have these prisoner rights groups that have these crazy things that prisoners are allowed because, hey, you know, you're a criminal. And it's like, wait, no, you're a criminal. Now, in a perfect world, we would try to correct these behaviors, right? That's why every country in the world has it's called a misnomer. It's called the correctional services. At least here in South Africa, our prison department is called correctional services, which it isn't, because it doesn't correct shit. Overwhelming majority of criminals end right back in jail. And you do sort of think to yourself, well, okay, if you guys aren't going to correct the problem, why the hell are we treating these prisoners, these criminals, with kid gloves? Make their lives hell in there. Like, if you can't correct their behavior, make them so afraid of ever coming back that you keep them on the straight and narrow, right? Like, screw human rights. They broke the law. They should be paying the price for it. So as a contract, rehabilitation doesn't work. That is why Bukele is popular. I think rehabilitation does work, but I think most countries in the world wouldn't have the money for it. Because if you want to do rehabilitation, you would need psychologists in prison. You would need a program that teaches prisoners structure, order, discipline, and it would have to be tailored to almost every single prisoner individually, because every single one of them are going to need different things from society or in order to function in society. Obviously, this is excluding psychopaths and sociopaths. That's not something we can solve. But I think it can be done. I just think it's almost unreasonable to expect a government that has millions of inmates to be able to do that. I don't think that's a reasonable thing to expect. I don't see how the government could do that. At least that's my sort of initial read on it. I would have to think about it more, I think. Maxima, oh yeah, of course. There are some, but remember there is also prisoners or criminals who really are just victims of circumstance. Right? So they're not criminals because they were necessarily born criminals, but circumstances made it so that this was the only way to survive, and they just became used to this life. So that does exist, and you do have But now this is where the problem comes in. Do we build an entire system to preserve the possibility of maybe out of every 100 prisoners, you have one of these guys that is just a victim of their own circumstances? Like, how do you do that, right? It's almost impossible to do. I'll tell you guys how I know for a fact like prison is the biggest joke on earth. If you want drugs, there's no place on earth better to get it than in a prison. That should tell you everything you need to know. This is supposed to be an enclosed space with zero access with the outside world unless it is monitored. Like, you technically should be incapable of getting into anything into that prison, because unlike in the real world where people can't check your mail, they can't like just walk into your house and do an inspection. In prison, they can absolutely do that. Every piece of mail is checked. Every single interaction between prisoners and non-prisoners is monitored. They listen to what is being said unless you're talking to your lawyer. Like, all of these things are monitored, and yet it all still gets in, right? You have prisoners that live the high life in prison. I know of a gang in South Africa. I watched this video of the documentary of the gang. The entire gang leadership. This is one of the most brutal gangs in South Africa. It's the Numbers Gang. They're literally called the Numbers Gang. The entire leadership of the Numbers Gang is in prison. They run the entire gang from inside the prison. How? And do you know why they do it in prison? Because it's the best place to recruit. That's why every single one of their leaders, if you start to make your way up in the gang, at some point you have to be caught and go to prison so that you can become part of the upper leadership of the gang. Now you're in prison. And they're running the whole show from within that prison. It's wild. Like, that's how broken, at least the South African prison system is that broken. Google up the semi-documentary about the Karandiru prison. Who produced this, Metin? Because if it's an actual... The name Casa de Detencio, House of Detention, was given by federal interventor Adamar Pereira de Barros. By state decree 9789 abolished the Cadia Publica. It once housed more than 8,000 prisoners and was considered the largest prison in Latin America at the time. It was the site of the Carandiru massacre. I think this is the one you're referring to. The incident was started by a prisoner revolt at around 1:30. Prison director Jose Ismael Pedrosa was warned that a fight had started between two groups in cell block 9 after a game of football. The groups were led by the inmates Luis Tavares, the Azevedo, known as Quelo, the rabbit, and Antonio Luis Nascimento, known as Barba, Beard. The fight then escalated into a prison riot that lasted 3 hours. Prisoners were reportedly attacking each other with knives and pipes. The conflict consisted of 2,069 prisoners against 15 guards, resulting in the guards quickly losing control of the prisoners. Around 2:15, the prison director, Dr. Jose Ismael Pedrosa, informed the local military police about the uprising. Colonel Uberiton Guimares of the PMESP mobilized the shock police battalions, and after a phone call with the Secretary of Public Security, Pedro Franco de Campos gave the order for an incursion of 341 policemen into the prison complex. The prison director attempted to negotiate with the prisoners using a megaphone, but was pushed aside by the storming military police force. The deaths took place in the first four floors of cell block 9. In the first 2 floors, an incursion by Rota policemen led to 15 deaths in the first floor and 78 deaths in the second floor. In the third floor, the COE incursion led to 8 deaths, and in the fourth, a gate incursion led to 10 deaths. In documentary by police content creator Elias Jr., Rota officers who took part in the second floor massacre defended their actions by stating that riot police units were unable to advance due to firearms being employed by the rebellious inmates, and the prisoners had attempted to infect the policemen with HIV using bodily fluids. 2013 testimony, former Rota Colonel Walter Alves Mendonca described coming across a decapitated body, having fired his weapon after feeling impacts on his ballistic shield, and that prisoners armed with blades got into hand-to-hand combat with his unit. He also described Rota as a priesthood by the end of his testimony. Many of the inmates had not yet been tried or convicted. By the end of the day, 111 prisoners were dead and 37 more were injured. In 2022, Deutsche Welle articles stated that 3,500 bullets were fired within the span of 20 minutes, whilst a 1993 Amnesty report states that of some 5,000 bullets that were fired, 515 were found in dead prisoners' bodies. Hands among the dead were found in front of the face or behind the head, suggesting defensive positions. No police were injured. Wow. This is wild. So in other words, the police really laid into these guys. You see, but this is also where I would say, I don't think that they should have human rights if you're a prisoner, but this is also just police brutality at some point, right? So there needs to be that balance. The issue again is the government is terrible at balance. Like, when's the last time you saw the government doing anything balanced? The government either completely overreacts or doesn't react at all until it's far too late. And it's always a mess with the government, man. Always. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time for me to go. I have to rest my voice at least for tomorrow. Tomorrow is Good Friday, so I will not be here tomorrow. Like I already told you, I'm singing in the choir, and then after that, probably gonna have a barbecue or something. I will probably be back on Saturday, though. So we will most likely have a Saturday stream, because Saturday is just a normal day. But I thank all of you for coming out and hanging out with me and spending your time with me. I hope you had fun. I know I certainly enjoyed entertaining you guys. I hope it was entertaining to all of you. Really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for all of the support, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for everything that you guys do, all of the donations and the subscriptions. It really does mean the absolute world to me. and just for liking the videos and the streams and stuff. I really appreciate you guys. As always, be good to each other, be kind to each other, and I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.